All right, everybody, thank you so much for joining. I'm going to go ahead and get started. My name is Laura Jackson. I'm the volunteer manager for AHC. I really appreciate y'all coming to learn more about this important topic. AHC, we're a resident-focused organization, and you are resident-focused every time you're volunteering with us. So we really appreciate that, appreciate you being here tonight. And I'm going to turn it over to my coworker, Stephanie Bass, who will take it from here.
Thank you, Laura. Good evening, everyone. My name is Stephanie Bass. I am one of our assistant directors here at AHC, and I support our teams who are working on the social services side of our resident services team. You may know some of those staff members. You may work with them in your volunteer roles. But my team works on site and provides direct services and support to residents, largely focused on housing stability and food security and community building efforts and all of that. So I'm happy to be here with you all tonight. Just a little bit about why I'm here. I have some experience. My background is in clinical social work, and I have some experience with trauma training and implementing trauma-informed practices in my previous job and also here at AHC. It's something that I care very much about and think is very important. So I'm honored to be here with you all. And I also wanted to just thank you for what you do with us at AHC and how you support our residents and our staff. We can't do what we do without you. So I just wanted to say that we're so grateful for you. And I'm grateful to be here with you all tonight. So I think it's a pretty big group this evening. Otherwise, I would kind of have us go around and have everyone do introductions. But in lieu of that, I'll just kind of get started into the topic so we have a little bit more time to do some breakout conversations later in the training. And if there's any questions, we want you all to have time to ask your questions and time for discussion. So just to introduce this topic, why are we talking about this tonight? There are a lot of organizations across the country that are working to implement trauma-informed practices. This is something that the mental health and the behavioral health communities have, obviously been doing for a long time, but there's new research that's come out in the last decade or so around understanding the impacts of trauma, and trauma can affect behaviors. And so there are many communities and what we call sort of non-traditional settings where this information and this research is being implemented. So I'm going to share with you all the agenda for what we are going to be talking through tonight. I just wanted to acknowledge, if we were doing this training in person, usually I would provide some snacks, drinks for you all, coloring pages, pipe cleaners, crayons, things, color pencils, what we call manipulatives, because what we know in the research is that just generalized in learning, it's better to have kind of things that we can touch or taste or see, engage our senses. It just kind of helps our brains learn better. But especially because this topic can be, challenging or difficult for some of us to hear about or to discuss. I usually provide those as a way for us to kind of, work through things and make it a little bit easier to get through this training. But since I don't have those tools, I want to encourage you all to do what you need to do for yourselves, at home or wherever you are right now. So if you need to get up and stretch, if you need to do jumping jacks, you need to get yourself a snack or water, please feel free to do whatever you need to do to feel comfortable. We really want this to be a safe space for you and an environment for you. So we're going to say that up front. I'm going to share a resource with you in a moment, but here is kind of the the agenda of what we're going to talk about tonight. We're going to talk about the definition of trauma. We're going to talk a little bit more about different types of trauma and maybe signs and symptoms. We're going to take a little break, and then we're going to talk through some trauma sensitive strategies that hopefully you could incorporate in your role as volunteers. We're going to talk a little bit about resiliency and about, what to do, how to maybe prevent some challenging behaviors, or what happens when we are experiencing someone with a challenging behavior. And then we're going to break out into groups, talk through a couple of real scenarios that could potentially happen. I'm going to share some resources, and then that's it. Okay, so as I said a moment ago, this is a 24-hour resource, this 1-800 number. If you don't already have this, this is for you to have for yourselves. If you know somebody that could benefit from this resource, if something comes up for you tonight in this conversation that's difficult, that you want to process, I just wanted to share this resource so you have it on hand for whatever purpose you might need it for. So again, please do take care of yourself during this session, and we'll go ahead and get into the definition of trauma. So this is how SAMHSA, SAMHSA is the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, defines trauma. So according to SAMHSA, the definition is based on 3 E's. So try to remember the 3 E's of trauma in terms of the definition. So experiences that cause intense physical and psychological stress reactions. It can refer to a single event, multiple events, or a set of circumstances. And then the 3rd E is effects. So experiences by an individual as physically and emotionally harmful or threatening, and that has lasting adverse effects on the individual's physical, social, emotional, or spiritual well-being. And of course, we'll talk a little bit more about this, but each individual could have a different reaction to a certain situation or something that happens. Even if it's the same thing that 2 people experience, they could have a different effect. So it's really the definition of trauma. It doesn't necessarily look the same for everybody. It just depends on the individual, depends on your background, depends on a lot of different factors. But the definition, according to SAMHSA, are these 3 E's: experiences, events, and effects. So next, we're going to talk a little bit about some common forms of trauma. This is not an exhaustive list by any means. There are many different types of situations or occurrences that can happen to people that can be felt as traumatic. This is just a list of common forms of trauma. So I'm not going to read these out, but you can see here. We do know that children who witness, violence in the home sometimes suffer even stronger effects than those who are the direct victims of violence. We know that many of the residents in the communities that we serve have, experiences maybe from immigration that have been traumatic. Many have been exposed to trauma in home countries as a result of war or terrorism. Events that have happened here, globally, we experienced COVID-19, which was traumatic across the entire world. So much loss, so many impacts to our economic health and well-being, in addition to our physical health. And, other events here in the United States that have been traumatic to groups of people, Hurricane Katrina, the murder of George Floyd. There are many things, many different kinds of trauma that can happen to individuals or groups. So these are just some common forms of trauma. I also wanted to say this, I didn't say this at the top, but I'll say it now, that one thing that we do know about trauma is that it's very common, it's widespread, and the research tells us that, trauma is everywhere. It's everywhere. And so this is really something that I hope will be useful for you all in your roles as volunteers, but it is really a human initiative. And I hope that after tonight, you will have some additional maybe some additional tools in your tool belt, not only in your volunteer roles, but just as human beings. This is really about trying to understand behaviors and how to communicate with one another. And so that's our hope, is that this is really something that can be beneficial and helpful for you in multiple spheres. So I'm sorry I didn't say that up front. I meant to do that. Next slide, Laura, please. So here we're going to just take a look at trauma in 3 different spheres. We're going to look at the single incident, the acute trauma, the smallest circle first. So someone might have one traumatic experience that's really isolated to a single acute event. Could be a car accident, could be a house fire, etc. If you move up to that middle circle, we're looking at complex trauma. So complex trauma occurs when someone has multiple exposures to traumatic events. That could be things like ongoing child abuse and neglect, or experiencing or witnessing domestic violence, could be exposure to community and neighborhood violence. Those things might fall into that middle complex trauma sphere. Then the biggest circle is systemic trauma, which refers to things like racism, poverty, discrimination, that might be themes, across the lives of children and families that we're working with, or in our own experiences. So systemic traumas can really permeate all of the systems that we interact with. And the sort of ongoing nature of these types of traumas can have a lot of influence on how people view their environment and their world. So looking at these 3 circles, you can see how it's quite possible for one person to experience trauma in all 3 of these spheres at the same time. Move to the next slide, Laura. Oh, back one, please. There we go. So here's another way of considering systemic trauma, the big circle. So oftentimes the conditions created by systemic issues like poverty and discrimination can impact the access that people have to all kinds of opportunities. Opportunities to enhance health, well-being, and resilience. So I like to present this slide as part of this training because, up to this point, it can feel pretty heavy. The definition of trauma, looking at the types of trauma. So this is a way to consider that systemic trauma and to look at equity and opportunity structures as a way that we can help, and that we are helping to mitigate the impacts of that systemic trauma bubble. So I want you all to first take a look at the photos here. I'm curious, how many of you have seen this graphic before? This is demonstrating the difference between equality and equity. If you've seen this, can you give the little hands up? What do you call it? Emoji reaction. There we go. Awesome. Andrea, Sam, you all have seen this before. Great. Brian, you've seen this before. Excellent. Does anybody feel comfortable kind of describing how you understand this graphic for the group? No pressure. You don't have to. I'll say more about it. But if anybody's like, I would love to share what I know about this. Oh, how do you pronounce? Is this Sachin? Sachin?
Yep, Sachin.
Sachin. Great.
Yeah, so it looks like from the graphic that equity is basically getting what you need to, see at the same level as the other person, and equality is just getting the same as the other person.
Exactly. Thank you so much. Absolutely. So we used to operate kind of in this world of helping the helping profession and services, the services world, in terms of thinking about equality and how everyone should have the same thing. And then at some point somebody realized that's that's not right. That's not accurate, because if everybody gets the same thing, we're all coming from different experiences. We all have different resources, or, we're not all the same. That would work if we were all exactly the same. But we're not. And so we have different capabilities and different strengths and different challenges, and all of those things. So what we really need to shift towards is an equity lens. So that's exactly what Sachin said, is that we need to provide different things, because if these two people both have a short stool, the taller person has the advantage. So obviously she needs something different in order to be able to access the same resources, to be able to access those books. She needs a taller stool. So that's what we are aiming to do, is to provide equity, to work towards equity, and provide opportunities for people that can boost access to resources. So I like to share this because it gives sort of a little bit of hope in this kind of dark topic of, what can we do about this? What do we do about this issue of trauma being pervasive? And I just want to point out that what you all are doing as volunteers, you are participating in this. And so what do you all see on this list as ways that AHC and that you as volunteers are participating in sort of boosting access, or helping to provide an opportunity structure? Is there anything that sticks out on this list to you as something that you are participating in, or that AHC offers? Anyone want to chime in?
Write in the chat if you don't want to speak up.
Absolutely. You can type it in the chat. Any ideas you have about this?
All right, people are writing in: community support system, housing, education, guidance.
Awesome.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Healthy food, yes.
Healthy food, absolutely.
Access to the natural environment. Food.
Mhm.
Got some food distribution volunteers here.
Yay, thank you. Absolutely. There are many things on this list, and this is probably not an exhaustive list. But absolutely, those of you that are helping with our food distributions, are helping to bring healthy food to people who need that. Education, our after school programs. I'm sure that many of you are volunteering with our after school or teen programs. We're providing access, bringing that here where people live. And then also positive guidance and that community support system. You all are that for our kids and for our families. Our recreation, our community centers, at some of our sites, we provide computers or computer skills training. So there's that sort of digital equity piece that we participate in. Some of our programs and services are focused on health, mental health. There's so much here. Sometimes I do this training for our staff. I do this training for our staff at AHC. Yeah. And that's okay. Laura's going to bring it back. But sometimes our staff even forget that on this list, there's affordable housing. That is, what we do at AHC. Our main line of business of providing and developing affordable housing is boosting access to a resource that families otherwise couldn't have or wouldn't have access to. How's it going?
Yeah, excuse my technology issues here. I don't know what happened there.
It's okay.
Little review of everything we've already covered.
What'd you say?
We're going to reviewing here the slides. Where were we?
Reviewing.
There we
go.
go.
We're reviewing. We're on equity. So any other thoughts or questions about about this slide kind of before we move on. I just wanted to point out that what you all are doing and what you all are offering is helping to boost equity, which is helping to mitigate the impacts of systemic trauma. And I don't know if you've thought about it that way before. Maybe you have, but wanted to make sure that you all know that you are part of a solution to this issue. Okay, so we'll move on to the next slide. So we're going to talk about some symptoms of trauma, what symptoms might look like. When we talk about the, just going back to the systemic trauma, the big bubble, it's important to remember that many people who are sort of experiencing trauma in that sphere won't really be able to identify. Sometimes they can, but sometimes, not always, they won't be able to identify a particular experience as being traumatic. But it's the ongoing stress of living in an with that one of those systemic traumas or multiple traumas, and then with limited access to opportunities that can create the same elevated stress hormones and trauma symptoms as somebody who's been through an acute trauma experience. So I just wanted to point that out. We're going to talk a little bit more about what happens in the brain and the body when someone experiences trauma. So here's some symptoms. Again, this is not an exhaustive list of symptoms, but it's some common things that you could see or that someone who has experienced trauma might display. Who's heard of a trigger? Raise your little hand on with your Andrea, Sam, Allison. Yeah. Maggie, absolutely. So the word trigger has kind of become very pop culture. People kind of use it, Yvonne, Janet, a lot. You know, I'm triggered, but a trigger is actually a psychological term. Something happens. It could be anything. It could be a sound, a smell, a touch. That's a reminder of a traumatic experience that someone experienced or something that they associate with it. Triggers can be very unpredictable and difficult to anticipate, both for the person who experienced the event and also for anyone that's working with them or talking with them. So consider that unexpected and seemingly an extreme reaction to a situation could be a possible trauma trigger. So here are some common symptoms you might see. So those of you that volunteer with us working with children or teens, do any of these signs and symptoms stick out to you? Is there something that might be common that you might see working with children or teens who have experienced trauma? Is it Andrea?
Yeah.
Andrea? Great.
Yeah. I mean, in terms of the emotional description, like that sort of feeling overwhelmed by all of your coursework, like letting things pile up. I see that happen a lot. And I think that might be a response to trauma because it's
Absolutely.
up there.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for sharing that. Especially as teenagers, get more advanced in their coursework, and there's so much going on just for teens in terms of all of the things. And then, if there are the other things going on in their lives that are traumatic, absolutely. Anybody else want to share anything that might jump out at you if you work with children or teens? Oftentimes with our younger kids, we might see behavioral symptoms here. So sort of the hyper aggressive, impulsive, acting out behaviors or withdrawn. I mean, all of these you could see with any age group, but I just wanted to talk about it in terms of, what you all are experiencing or what you might have seen with different groups. the aggressive and impulsive behaviors are, are kind of common trauma symptoms that you might see in children. And actually, there are many kids who are being misdiagnosed, with ADHD. That's been happening in the United States. Many folks in the medical community are, learning more about this and are doing more screening for trauma because, they're misdiagnosing with ADHD when it actually, the symptoms look very similar, that sort of impulsivity, aggressive behavior, hyperactivity, looks a lot like ADHD, but it could be a trauma symptom. And so a lot of medical providers are screening now for trauma to try to understand what's going on holistically, which is a good shift. What about adults, maybe older adults? Do any of these symptoms pop out to you that are common in different groups, a different group? I don't know if any of you all are volunteering with our older adults, our seniors. Sometimes our staff who work with seniors will point out the cognitive symptom for our older adults. So memory loss, confusion, and some of those things naturally happen as we age. But if there is a senior who has, in addition, experienced trauma, those symptoms can be exacerbated. So or happen more quickly. I can't see, is somebody raising a hand, or is there something that popped up under?
Somebody making a joke, but it does happen naturally. Start losing our memories.
I couldn't read the comment. Thank you for sharing. Thank you for sharing. Yes, absolutely. So, you could see any of these in any age group, but it's also important to point out that not everyone who experiences trauma has severe adverse effects. We are not defined by our traumatic experiences. However, there are some that carry kind of lasting burdens of those experiences, whether it's, conscious, we're aware of that, or sometimes it's unconscious. So the research tells us that trauma can have an impact on our neurobiology, on our brains, in the short or the long term, if it is left unaddressed and unhealed. Raise your hand if you've heard of executive functioning skills. Who knows what executive? Laura knows. Andrea, Allison, Sam, Guy, is it Guy? Does anybody want to share with the group your understanding of executive function? Leah? So executive functioning skills are the ability to pay attention, the ability to organize and plan, the ability to initiate tasks, to regulate our emotions, to self-monitor. All of those things can be very difficult to do if you have experienced trauma and your executive functioning skills may be compromised. I mean, all of us can struggle with those things. I, need a lot of reminders for things. Sometimes, we all kind of are on a spectrum with executive function, but research tells us that those who have experienced trauma can have impacts to executive functioning skills. Has anybody heard of the term toxic stress? Raise your hand if you've heard of toxic stress. Allison and Mary. And Janet, great. So toxic stress is defined as the excessive or prolonged activation of stress response systems in the body and the brain, or more commonly known as fight or flight. Fight, flight, they've actually added a few more F words to that: fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. Fawn is the fourth one that's added. And if you don't know what that means, it's essentially fawn means just saying yes to everything to just make the issue go away. So fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. They've added another to that. So toxic stress. Does anybody have any ideas of how long were our bodies as humans, our bodies and brains designed to experience a stress response? So when we're in fight, flight, or fawn, a lot of F's, our amygdalas are activated. That part of our brain is activated and it's sending signals to our bodies telling us we're in survival mode. We need to survive. So our logical brains are not working. It's like we're running from a bear who's chasing us. Who can guess? You can put it in the chat if you want. You can shout it out. How long do you think our bodies and brains were designed to be in that state, fight, flight, or freeze, or fawn? An activated stress response. Just take a guess. What do you think?
Somebody said 30 minutes. Anybody else? 20 minutes? Minutes, not hours.
You guys are smart. I'm not catching you here. That's right. 20 minutes. 20 minutes. Yes. Our bodies and brains are designed to be in that fight, flight, or freeze for 20 minutes. And so I point that out as a way to just express, if you can imagine the life of a child or a teen who is living in toxic stress on a regular basis. So think about that middle circle of complex trauma. If somebody is living in a home where there's domestic violence, or in a community where there's community violence, their brains are activated, their bodies are activated all the time. So if you look at some of these symptoms and behaviors, you can understand that using a trauma-informed lens, we're looking at these symptoms or behaviors really as adaptations. Their behaviors are adaptive. They make sense given what the person has experienced or is experiencing. Some trauma survivors may display other kinds of trauma reactive behaviors, such as smoking, using alcohol or drugs, missing work. You might see sort of aggressive outbursts. Survivors may also experience impacts to their physical and mental health, such as depression, anxiety, obesity, even physical health impacts, COPD, stroke, and heart disease. Next slide, Laura.
And I also see Mary has her hand raised.
Mary, did you have a question or comment? Okay. Has anyone heard of the ACEs study? Raise your hand. Laura has heard of the ACEs study. Yvonne has heard of the ACEs study. Excellent. So ACE stands for Adverse Childhood Experience. This study was originally done in the 90s to essentially understand some physical health impacts that were happening. Researchers came together, put together a screening tool that measures what they call ACE score. So it asked 10 questions, and they were trying to understand how many adverse childhood experiences someone had between the ages of 0 and 18. So what came out of this research study is that the higher your ACE score, so the higher number of experiences, adverse experiences you have in childhood, they found a connection between that and your health and well-being kind of throughout the lifespan. So this was pretty illuminating because, we understand, I think people understand pretty commonly that experiencing trauma can really impact our mental health. But they were making connections and links to even physical health symptoms later in life. Like I mentioned earlier, heart disease, COPD, other physical health symptoms. And that was kind of the new piece of information that, and this is not saying that if you have an ACE score of 10, you're going to have heart disease or, some other disease. It's just talking about at the population level, the higher your ACE score is, the higher your risk to develop challenges throughout your life. Was there a comment in the chat there?
Yvonne is reminding me, I'm reminding everyone that we did a training on this a few years ago, and I do have a video. If anybody really wants to dig in and learn more about the ACE study, we did a session on that during COVID.
Excellent. Great. So I just wanted to mention that in this conversation that, that's sort of part of this. And so it's sort of like, okay, now that we know this information, this seems to be the next question is, what do we do now that we know that there are these links and these connections? So we'll go to the next slide. One of the things that is happening in systems and programs and organizations across the country is people are working to be more trauma informed. And what does that mean? What does that mean to be trauma informed on a sort of organizational level? So earlier we talked about the 3 E's that define what trauma is. And now we're going to talk about the 4 R's that sort of defines, again, according to SAMHSA, what is a trauma informed system, organization, or program. So the 4 R's. The first one, we realize the widespread impact of trauma and understand potential paths for recovery. So we talked about that earlier. Trauma is everywhere. It's widespread. The second R, recognizing signs and symptoms of trauma in clients, families, staff, everyone involved, volunteers, everyone involved within the system. We are learning how to respond by integrating that knowledge about trauma into our policies, our procedures, and our practices. And then the 4th R is that we are actively working to resist re-traumatizing others. It's not going to be perfect. We're humans. And so, we can't do all of this right all of the time. But this is just a way to understand how a system can work towards being trauma informed and practicing like weaving into our policies and our procedures and our practices, this sort of lens of understanding that behaviors sometimes are not intentional, that they're adaptive. So a trauma-informed approach can be implemented in any type of service setting or organization. And so what I like to say too is that, as we work to weave in some of this information into the housing system, this is sort of a non-traditional setting. This is newer in the world of housing and affordable housing. And so sometimes when people hear we're talking about this, it's like, well, we're not going to be therapists. No, we're not. We're not. This is not about, becoming therapists, but we don't have to be therapists in order to be more therapeutic in our interactions with each other. So really, and this is kind of the crux of the whole thing, some of you might have heard this before, but being trauma informed is really a culture shift from saying, what's wrong with you, to saying, what happened to you? So I'll just let that sink in for a minute. Instead of saying, what's wrong with that kid or what's wrong with them? we want to say, what happened? What happened to them? So it's a paradigm shift into understanding behaviors in a different way. I think this is so a trauma-informed approach, a little bit more about this in terms of organizations. A trauma-informed approach adheres to some key principles instead of, prescribed set of practices. They can be generalized across multiple types of settings. But I just wanted to point these out. There's 6 kind of key principles that we think about when trying to incorporate this trauma-informed approach. So safety, trustworthiness, transparency, peer support, collaboration and mutuality, which is sort of like a shared vision, empowerment, voice and choice, and cultural, historical, and gender are the principles that we're thinking about when we want to incorporate this trauma-informed approach. Next slide. Yeah, there we go. That was the break time, but that's okay. So I believe Laura has sent this out to you all, or will send out to you all, a document that I created in my former job, but there are things I think that are applicable that you can take from this in your role as volunteers. I wanted to have a way to sort of operationalize these ideas around trauma and understanding behaviors, through this trauma lens. It's like, again, that's sort of, what do we do with this information now that we know this? So, this is definitely, again, not an exhaustive list of strategies, but just a few practical things that I put together that might be useful for you in your role, since some of you are directly working with children and teens, some of you are directly, providing food service to our residents. So here are some strategies. The first one, making eye contact as culturally appropriate, is really about just using your genuine self and warmth to create a safe space, a safe emotional space. Someone who has experienced trauma in their past, it may take a while for them to trust people or to feel safe and connected right away. It can take time. So really, this is about focusing on nonverbal communication. So, having a relaxed body language and smiling if that's appropriate, or if that's feels natural. We're talking about using our genuine self to create a comfortable space for people. The second one is providing reminders and following up. So, what we know about impacts of trauma on our brains and our executive function, we talked about that, is that, that ability to organize and plan, or to initiate tasks, or to stay focused on our tasks, can be challenged if you've experienced trauma. So providing reminders, a phone call to follow up if you're working with somebody on something that you need them to do. And that could be true across the board. I think I mentioned I like reminders. I like the 45 text messages that I get from my dentist to remind me that I have an appointment. So, we all kind of need that from time to time, and especially those of us that have experienced trauma. Number 3 is really hard. This is a hard one. Again, this is something to strive towards. It's not going to be perfect, but we can learn to identify defensive behaviors sometimes as a sign that could be a sign of trauma, a trauma reactive behavior, rather than a deliberate outburst. Emotional regulation, we talked about that as a potential impact and a sign or a symptom. So you might be on the receiving end of a challenging behavior or a situation. If we can kind of hold that in our minds, be mindful of trauma as a potential precipitating factor in this that can help us to stay what the research says called rationally detached, and to not take those personally, like this is an attack on me personally, or this is something that I did. Sort of like this person has something going on. Again, it's not easy to do, but it's something to strive towards. Again, something that I think could be applicable in your general life, at work, when dealing with people in general. It's a good rule of thumb to try not to take those things personally. Hard to do. Easy to say, hard to do. Number 4 is take breaks. Self-care is really essential for those of us who work or live or volunteer in trauma-exposed environments. You can find what works for you, whether you need to just take a 5-minute walk, whether you need to call a friend, take breaks as you need them. It's important to have space and to take care of ourselves in life, and also in, the volunteer work that you're doing. Number 5 is a big one. Practicing cultural competence, promoting racial and social equity. Again, there's that equity piece to sort of mitigate the big systemic trauma bubble. It's important to understand that our point of view is not the only way. We need to work towards being able to work with people from a variety of different backgrounds, ethnic, cultural, economic, political, religious backgrounds. It's being aware and respectful of others and the way that they view the world. Identifying our own false beliefs or stereotypes and biases that might be conscious or unconscious. It's hard. It's a big one, and it encompasses a lot of different components. But we need to be aware of this, work to be aware of this, and there's a lot of work to do around number 5. So, awareness is the first step. Number 6 is empower and provide choice whenever possible. Sometimes our systems and our policies can be set up in a way that inadvertently minimize choice and individual strength. So we really need to work hard to level the playing field and be on, sort of equal status with somebody, especially for you all who are volunteering with children or teens. There's a power, imbalance there, and so you'll see a video here in a few minutes that talks about even just like physically sitting down and being on the same level with a child can help, instead of, towering over them, talking with them. So leveling the playing field is important, finding ways to empower others and provide choices. I mean, who doesn't like to have choice? It can be very simple. Would you like to meet with me at 3 o'clock or 4:30? What works best for you? There are small ways we can do this. Even a small shift, can sometimes have a big impact. Offering somebody a choice and trying to give the power back is a trauma sensitive strategy. Any questions about that before we move on, or comments? Okay. So next slide, Laura. So now we're going to talk a little bit about resiliency. So trauma is just not something that you get over when somebody has an experience. The goal of helping people to be resilient is to really, we want to help people integrate the trauma story into the life story. It's one story of an entire lifetime of stories. Being resilient means feeling safe, capable, and lovable. And what people who have experienced trauma often need in order to recover is a feeling of a sense of safety, information and healthy coping skills, hope and optimism, a sense of connection, and supportive relationships are all really, really important for people in helping them to build resiliency. It's important also to recognize that sometimes when people experience trauma and they overcome that, they have supports, they have some of these things, they have, hope, somebody that helps them to foster hope, connection and relationships. They can sometimes come out even stronger and more resilient than they were if they hadn't have gone through what they went through. So a little bit here, just a little bit about building resiliency and how we can maybe be a part of that. You all in your role as volunteers, have a unique opportunity to help not only what you're doing by providing, education or tutoring or providing fresh food, but in your relationship to those people that you're working with. Next slide, Laura. Okay, so now we're going to talk a little bit about some strategies and ways that you can work to prevent those re-traumatizing folks, or prevent some of those triggers. Again, it's really unpredictable, so there may be things that happen that are outside of your control, but there are some things that are within our zone of control. So we already talked about empowerment and choice. So offer choices whenever you can and try to avoid power struggles. It's really important. Focusing on problem solving over punishment. So helping children and youth come up with ways to control their own behavior. That is sometimes useful, like bringing them in on the conversation of problem solving together. We're going to talk more about this next one we already have talked a little bit about nonverbal communications, but being aware of your physical presence, tone of voice, volume. I mean, what if I talk to you guys like this? Did everybody just jump a little bit when I raise my, I do that in in-person trainings. It's really kind of funny for me to see everybody, but I can't see you all. Most of you have your cameras off. But volume of your voice, tone of voice, these things are really important. And when it comes to preventing, behavior, and also de-escalating, which we'll talk about in a minute. Generally avoid physical touch, work hard to maintain sort of an even tone of voice, neutral body language. Have a game plan. Many of our sites have this already, to offer children and youth a safe place to calm down if they need it. Some of our after-school programs might have, calming corners or Zen zones. If you all have ideas for ways that we can do more of that or implement different strategies around making sure that there's a safe space to calm down, we're welcome to hearing ideas. And then if this is appropriate, let's see, devote program time to teaching children and youth skills. Yes, I know that I think all of our after school programs are doing social emotional curriculum, teaching kids to learn coping skills to help manage situations that become overwhelming is important. And this link is just another resource with more ideas around that. Next slide, Laura, please. So we've talked about this too. Building positive and caring relationships are really, really important. Remember that all youth have strengths, all children have strengths and assets that can be built upon. So, you want to, in the social work world, there's a perspective, a theory, it's called strength-based theory, strength-based perspective. So we want to really focus on the strengths instead of focusing on maybe what's not going right. We want to focus on what is going right. that can help build resiliency. And here's another little resource kind of embedded here, which Laura will send you this PowerPoint also so that you have access to these. Again, make sure that the setting is one where children and youth feel physically and psychologically safe. So we talked a little bit about how to do that. Create predictable structure. Routines are very helpful. Make transitions to new activities or spaces as calm and predictable as possible. And then here's another resource. Praise publicly, redirect privately. So if someone's doing something well, you want to praise them in front of other people. If someone's not doing something well, we want to have that conversation in private whenever that's possible. Next slide. So this is a little bit now about de-escalation. So those first two slides were how to prevent challenging behavior. Now, what happens if someone is in that fight, flight, or freeze or fawn? You can tell that someone is really activated. They're having a stress response. Here are some strategies of how you can manage that. So the first one is the same, being mindful of physical presence and tone of voice. The person that you're interacting with needs you to remain calm. It's like a mirror. So you want to mirror back to somebody else what you would like to see. It's helpful. They need that from you. So as much as we can, we have to do our own internal work to stay calm, because sometimes when someone is getting heightened, our natural human response is to also get heightened. It's like, if you heard that sort of term, like anxiety is contagious. And so what we want to do is work on our own selves to be able to stay calm and relaxed and keep a neutral tone of voice. Use active and reflective listening. Does anybody know what reflective listening is? Has anybody heard that term before? Reflective listening. Mary? So reflective listening is Allison. Great. Reflective listening is really essentially just saying back to somebody what you heard them say, because a lot of times when people are in fight, flight, or freeze, just feeling heard can help them to de-escalate. Essential repeating or summarizing what was said. Yep, that's right, Yvonne. Thank you. Exactly. So, saying, so what I hear you saying is that you're really upset about, that Johnny took your book and that's really frustrating for you. So you're repeating back what someone said, and that makes them feel heard and seen, and that can help de-escalate behavior. Think about what might actually be happening to trigger behavior. Ask some questions about what's going on in a compassionate way. This is so important, validating thoughts and feelings, and then offering choices. So it doesn't matter if what's happening, if somebody is just, there's nothing accurate about what someone is saying. We want to validate their thoughts and feelings, because that's where they are, and they're in that fight or flight. They're not thinking with their logical brain. So validating thoughts and feelings can help somebody regain a sense of control. Let's see, offer food and water. This is huge. We want to try to help people engage their senses. That can help someone come from being in a stress response back into their body, and that can help them de-escalate. So, have snacks, water nearby that you can offer. With kids, sometimes, with my own kids, I would do a game, or I would say, let's play a game. Like, tell me something red that you see. Tell me something purple. What do you see in this room that's green? And so just helping them kind of come back into their senses can help de-escalate. Avoiding judgment, and only offer advice and reassurance sparingly. Focus on that, providing choices, so that that a person can feel empowered to help themselves. So behavior is not driven by logic. They're in fight, flight, or freeze, and those survival responses are taking over. So we want to try to help someone to regulate. Next slide, Laura. Okay, so we have a little video. It is not 9 de-escalation skills for dealing with patrons. So just ignore that title. This is a 4-minute video about some more about calming and de-escalation strategies when someone is experiencing a stress response.
I had it pulled up and now I no longer have it pulled up. My apologies, everyone. Let's see.
No worries.
I'm gonna quit sharing. Oh, I did quit sharing. Did I quit sharing?
Nope, you're still sharing.
Okay, hang tight, everybody. Sorry.
Worries. And if you can't get it, Laura, we could always just, people will have access to this video when they get the PowerPoint, so we can skip it.
I was gonna.
Also.
Hi there.
Okay, let me share.
Okay. Awesome.
This brief video is going to describe simple calming and de-escalation strategies. When people are escalated, it often comes from a sense of threat or fear. Even if the threat is not real at the time, their past experiences with people and the world may have wired their brains to expect harm or danger. When we as humans perceive threat or are otherwise incredibly stressed or angry or scared, we activate our survival brain. This more primitive part of our brain has only one job: to keep us safe. It doesn't care about reason or logic. In fact, the thinking parts of our brain turn off and we act mostly on instincts. These instincts include reading nonverbal cues from our environment. Those nonverbal cues are actually more important than verbal cues or what people say to us. So when people are escalated, at their core, they want control. We give them control over their own safety and decisions. Do not block people, corner them, or block entrances or possible escape routes. As soon as you do, they want to fight or flee even more. Give 2 arms length distance. Keep our body posture open so it does not appear that you are hiding anything. Keep your body posture as relaxed as you can, even if it's hard. A looming, towering figure only sends the message that you want to dominate. So if it feels okay to do so, ask them what would make them feel safe or feel better. Put the control back on their turf. Ask what would help. Ask what could happen next. One of the most famous practices and sayings for de-escalation is low and slow, from Teresa Bolick. Low and slow refers to both your body movements and your voice or speech. Just like it sounds, we want to keep the tone of our voice low and the speed of our voice slow. When you lower your tone and speed, it makes it more possible for the other person to process what you are saying and not feel threatened, as opposed to a higher pitched tone and quick speech, which frankly increases stress. Then we also try to lower and slow down our body movements and posture. So try to sit in a chair or on the floor, especially if you were children, and especially if the person who is escalated is lower down than you. Maybe they're on the floor or in a chair. If you get on an even playing field, this gives the nonverbal cue that you mean no threat. And try to slow down your body movements so as to not further alarm their cues for danger. Move slowly, walk slowly, keep your hands out and open where they can see them. Next, use the tip, name it to tame it, made popular by Dan Siegel. By naming emotions, we gain control over them. Therapists have known this forever. Acknowledge that they may be feeling anxious, angry, especially if it's a child. Stay with that feeling, validate it. Let them know the feeling is okay as long as they stay safe. We also like to say, regulate over educate. When people are in distress, it's not the time to teach or educate or think back about what they could have done differently. The only goal is to regulate their emotions. Usually this is done by giving space and time, staying calm, and helping provide a calming atmosphere. It takes the body 20 to 30 minutes to come back down to baseline after a perceived or an actual threat. Just think of your own situations when something really scared you or startled you. Even if you look like you're getting back to normal, your body is still pumping all those stress hormones for a while. So wait it out. Just help people regulate. If the person was aggressive or destructive, especially if it's a child, there does, of course, need to be a consequence. But wait on talking about the consequence. Finally, two of the most important things you can do all along the way, and that's before people get too distressed, or even while they're distressed, is to validate their feelings and be empathic. I see you are struggling. I see this is hard. If it's okay, I'll stay here with you until you feel better.
Step into Wix Studio, the new web creation platform built for agencies.
All right. Thank you, Laura. So just some more there about calming and de-escalation. So the next slide, we're going to talk about what happens if someone discloses to you a traumatic experience, somebody that you're working with in your volunteer role, discloses something about what's going on with them to you. So we'll talk more about sort of how to respond in the aftermath of that, but in the immediate moment, it's important again to have our response be one of empathy, compassion, and non-judgment. So this is just some possible ways that you can respond that will help validate and normalize what someone is experiencing. So you could say things that, it makes sense that you're feeling this way. I'm sorry that happened to you. How can I help? I'm here for you when you are ready for help. So just providing an environment where the person can, talk safely about their experiences and be reassured that their reactions are normal. Next slide. It's also important to know our role. So again, we are not staff, we're not therapists, volunteers, none of us are there to provide therapy for anyone. So it's important that you talk with maybe the staff person that's assigned to your site. If someone discloses something to you, a child, a teen, an adult, doesn't matter. If someone discloses an experience to you, it's important that you report that to the staff member so that the staff person can follow up and respond in the appropriate way and following our protocols for that. Let's see. So factors, again, that can increase resilience, focusing on strengths. We've talked about that. For youth, the research tells us that it only takes a strong relationship with at least one competent, caring adult to make a difference for a child or a youth. If someone doesn't have a relationship at home, sometimes we are it here. Your volunteer relationship, our staff, having a relationship with one competent, caring adult can make a difference in the life of a child. And then for everyone, no matter what age, feeling connected to others and having a strong support system can help increase resilience and build resiliency. So those are the important parts for this slide. So next, the last little bit of time here, we're going to do some breakout groups for you all to talk about a few scenarios. I don't know how to do this in the virtual setting, so I'm just going to let you pick which one of these scenarios you want to talk about. Or Laura, did you have another idea?
Oh, no, I was going to let people pick. I realized that I
Yeah.
don't have a way to share them. So let's just take a minute here so that you can kind of look at the scenarios. Sorry,
Yep.
I should have.
No, that's okay. No worries. So scenario one is essentially a student, let's say a student that you work with in your volunteer role has started to miss meetings and they're on edge and distracted. Eventually they disclose that one of their parents is going through cancer treatments. So how would you respond using a trauma-informed lens? The second scenario is you're at a busy community event. Maybe you're volunteering at a food distribution or a busy event at a community, and a student is, or an adult, even anyone, is visibly upset and shares with you that they are currently experiencing domestic violence at home. How do you respond using a trauma-informed lens? That's scenario two. And scenario three is this is more just like personally in your life. You're at home, mail carrier is approaching your house. Your dog accidentally gets out the front door and starts barking at the mail carrier. The person jumps back and starts screaming at you when you come outside to get your dog. They throw the mail on the ground and walk away. How could you interpret this situation using a trauma-informed lens? So there won't be a test. This is no pressure, but this is just an opportunity for you all to talk in smaller groups about some of these concepts, how you can maybe utilize the trauma-informed lens to either respond or interpret a situation. Was there a question or comment? Okay, welcome back. I know that was brief, but I hope you guys had a chance to talk through one of these scenarios. Does anybody want to share out any ideas for any of these scenarios? Jessica, did you come off mute? Oh. Looks like Andrea raised her hand. I don't know if Jessica purposely came off of mute or not, but we'll go to Andrea.
Yeah, absolutely. So, my breakout group was focused on the first scenario. And something that I noticed about it was, unlike the other ones, like this is a scenario where you have a pre-existing relationship. I really want to focus on, just because creating a safe space for a student to even confide in you with topics such as that, like takes work. Like it doesn't just happen day one. And
Mhm.
like I think that like the importance of creating that safe space over time, using all the strategies that we've discussed in this session, as well as just like, showing that you're dependable, like showing that you are like empathetic, like being there for them, even not in times of crisis, can make it easier when more troubling things do come up. Just easier to ask for help, as well as easier to navigate those emotions with you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Andrea. Those relationships are so important and so meaningful to our students. And you're right, and we talked about this, if someone has experienced trauma, it can take longer to develop that trusting relationship and rapport. So again, thank you all for what you're doing. It's not always easy, and thank you for sharing your ideas there.
Liz, did you want
Did
to share?
anybody?
Maybe not. Liz is off mute, but maybe she doesn't want to share. I see that Amanda wrote in the chat asking if the students who attend programming are aware that volunteers are mandated reporters. And I don't know the answer to that, but I will find out. So. Thank
Lord,
you.
I can answer at least for Harvey Hall. We don't inform to the kids that they don't know that. At least at Harvey Hall.
Thanks, Norma.
Thank you, Norma.
And
Anybody else want to share? Oh, Nagat?
Same thing for Virginia Gardens. We don't let the children know. We don't let them know that the volunteers are like that. So it's quiet.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you, Nagat. Anybody else want to share any thoughts or ideas from the scenarios you discussed? Scenario you discussed? I know we're getting close to the end of our time here. Okay, well, hopefully these scenarios gave you a little bit of, practical ways that you can apply this information in a practical way, something that might actually happen to you in your life, scenario 3, which actually did happen to me, or, in your volunteer work with AHC. Hopefully you were able to discuss those. And then just lastly, wanted to, in this PowerPoint, share some resources for you all. Again, just want to reiterate, if a family or a child discloses that they're in need of a resource or that they're going through something that might prompt a referral to one of these, please share it with the staff person who is at your site where you're volunteering, so that they're aware and they can do that referral and connection. Just want to reiterate that, but here's just for your knowledge, here is some information on resources in Virginia, Arlington, Alexandria, and Fairfax. And then the next slide, we have some resources in Baltimore and Maryland. If any of you are volunteering at our Maryland properties, there's some information here for those resources. Thank you all so much for listening and for participating. I'm gonna give it back to Laura to close this out.
Yeah, thank you to Stephanie for taking the time to be with us and sharing about this. Again, volunteers, I really do appreciate everything you do for our students. You're on the front line, students and families that come to the food distributions. So I will mail all of this out to everybody. So you'll have these resources that you can refer back to. If you have questions, want to talk with me, want to talk with Stephanie, want to talk with the staff at your center, please do that. So thank you so much and have a good night.
Have a good night.
Have a good night, guys.
Thank you so much. Thanks for coming.
Thank you.
Take care of yourselves.
Hey,
Thank you. Have a good night.
thank
Good
you.
night.
Sorry to call you out, Liz. I thought you were off mute, but you weren't.
Thank you. Good night now.
All right, good night. Ah, all right. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Definitely. I was just reading the chat to see if there were any other.
Lots of thank yous at the end. Interesting point about should our students know that we're mandated reporters? So.
Yeah. We're actually talking about similar thing in social services. We're rolling out, I'll talk to you about it tomorrow, or some other time, but I think it's good to think through that. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. All right. Thank you so much.
Bye,
Bye.
Laura.
Safe drive.
You too. Oh, yeah.